When 7 American soldiers die in 10 days, fighting a war that costs nearly $1 billion every single day, something fundamental breaks in the logic of official narratives. When military commanders, who recently swore under oath that the African continent was absolutely vital for homeland security, suddenly go completely silent the moment bombs start dropping in the Middle East, we are forced to pay attention. An entire continent gets casually erased from strategic conversations, despite those very same generals warning that losing African partnerships would directly threaten their own soil. What we are witnessing today is not just another distant military operation. It is a cold, calculated pattern that exposes the brutal truth about geopolitical priorities. It proves unequivocally that Africa was never the genuine focus of the old empires, no matter how passionate and dramatic their diplomatic testimonies sounded. The rhetoric may be carefully polished, but the mathematics of war never lie. Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this story resonates, show your support with a like, a comment, or a subscription. It means more than numbers. It keeps the story alive. To understand the sheer magnitude of this geopolitical pivot, we must look beyond the polished press briefings and examine the raw, human cost of these decisions. The Pentagon made an announcement just this week that cuts incredibly deep when you understand the full context behind it. It is an announcement that most people scroll past on their screens without realizing what it actually reveals about broken promises, abandoned commitments, and the vast, unbridgeable gap between what governments say matters versus what they actually fund when decisions get real. Another soldier died from combat injuries sustained in the escalating Iran conflict, bringing the total killed to 7 service members in just 10 exhausting days of fighting. That 7th death belongs to Sergeant Benjamin Pennington, a 26-year-old young man from Glendale, Kentucky. He was wounded during a devastating attack at a military base in Saudi Arabia back on the 1st of March this year, and fought bravely for his life for an entire week before tragically succumbing to those injuries on the 8th of March. According to verified reports citing official Defense Department statements released that very same day, 6 other soldiers died on that exact same March the 1st date. They lost their lives when drones struck their operations center at the port of Shuiba in Kuwait. All 6 of those fallen service members were assigned to the 103rd Sustainment Command, an Army Reserve unit based out of Iowa. This detail is profoundly important. These were not career Special Forces operators who signed up for constant high-stakes deployments. They were regular citizens with civilian jobs, with calloused hands from everyday labor, and with loving families waiting back home who got called up to serve in this sprawling war. When you read their names, observe their ages, and see their quiet hometowns, you realize these are people who probably could not point to the Sahel region on a map if someone asked them to. Yet, they are dying in a rapidly expanding conflict that somehow makes the Sahel completely invisible in every strategic conversation currently happening in Washington. Here is where the money tells a story that no politician wants the public to examine too closely. The numbers reveal the true hierarchy of priorities far more honestly than any carefully worded diplomatic speech ever could. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, known as CSIS, a major Washington-based think tank, released a comprehensive analysis on the 6th of March. Their findings showed that the United States spent $3.7 billion in just the first 100 hours of this Iran operation. When you break down those staggering figures, it works out to roughly $891 million being spent every single day. We round that number to 900 million because the actual operational costs keep climbing relentlessly as the military machinery continues without any clear endpoint in sight. $900 million per day. Let that massive number sit heavily with you for a moment. To put that phenomenal rate of spending into its proper perspective, $900 million burned in 24 hours equals more than the entire annual budget that used to fund counterterrorism operations and security partnerships across the whole Sahel region before Washington decided to pull out. The empire burns through what could confidently finance a full year of African security cooperation in one single, violent day of fighting in the Middle East. This mathematical reality reality tells you absolutely everything you need to know about where priorities actually land when resources get allocated and tough, historic choices get made. But there is crucial context you need to understand, because this is not merely about one isolated war happening right now. It is about a cynical pattern that has been meticulously building for years. It is a devastating pattern of grand promises made, strategic partnerships swiftly abandoned, and urgent warnings completely ignored the instant something else demands the empire's attention. For decades, the soil of Africa has been treated as a geopolitical chessboard, a place where foreign powers arrive to extract value and plant the seeds of dependency, only to leave when the harvest no longer suits their immediate global strategy. The working people of the West and the sovereign citizens of Africa are both caught in this unforgiving machinery. One group pays with their tax dollars and the blood of their youth, while the other pays with the destabilization of their ancestral lands. When we look at the breathtaking speed with which billions of dollars are mobilized for destruction, while entire regions previously deemed vital are left in the dark, a chilling picture emerges. $900 million burned in a single day of warfare, equivalent to an entire year's security budget for the African Sahel. What does this reveal about the theatrical promises of the global elite? When the dust of this financial and military explosion finally settles, it exposes a betrayal so profound that it forces us to rethink everything we know about global partnerships. Let us rewind the clock just a bit to set the geopolitical stage properly. Back in the year 2024, a general named Michael Langley, who commands the United States Africa Command, stood firmly before Congress and testified under oath. He spoke with absolute conviction about the critical, undeniable importance of maintaining an American military presence in the Sahel region. According to detailed documentation summarizing that congressional testimony, General Langley's exact words included the stark statement that losing America's military footprint in the Sahel would severely degrade their ability to do active watching and warning. He explicitly tied this military posture directly to homeland defense, meaning he stood before lawmakers and the public, declaring that the sprawling Sahel region mattered intimately for American safety on American soil. He warned that terrorism developing in West Africa could eventually, and catastrophically, reach the United States itself. Keeping massive bases and deep intelligence partnerships there was emphatically not presented as some charitable foreign aid program. It was sold as a direct, non-negotiable national security imperative that protected the homeland. So, what actually happened when those grave, passionate warnings got tested by shifting political winds, sudden budget pressures, and competing global demands for finite military resources? In 2023 and 2024, the empire did exactly what General Langley had explicitly warned against doing. They systematically and ruthlessly closed down major strategic installations. This included the massive, highly advanced drone base in Niger that had cost hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money to meticulously build. The strategic void left behind was monumental. They abruptly pulled out critical intelligence assets, brought their military advisors home, and scaled back years of security cooperation to essentially nothing. The official explanations provided to the public kept shifting like loose sand in a desert storm. They blamed unexpected budget constraints, vaguely cited diplomatic complications with host governments, and pointed to evolving strategic priorities that supposedly required a massive reallocation of forces. But the bottom line stayed crystal clear, cutting through the thick fog of diplomatic spin. No matter how much political manipulation got applied to the decision, the African continent got severely downgraded in the priority list. The Sahel got completely abandoned despite those dire homeland defense warnings. All those impassioned speeches about how absolutely vital the region was for protecting America turned out to be just hollow words. They evaporated the very instant they became politically or financially inconvenient to maintain. This is the grand tragic illusion of the bureaucratic theatre. We are forced to witness a system where profound testimonies mean absolutely nothing, and where vital partnerships are treated as entirely disposable. The working men and women with calloused hands in the Sahel, who had generously offered the soil of their ancestors in the hope of planting seeds for a stable future, were left with nothing but broken promises and empty concrete runways. They were callously treated as a mere backdrop for someone else's global game. Simultaneously, the young soldiers whose lives are now being rapidly spent in the fires of the Middle East are tragically paying the ultimate price for elite policy choices that serve interests having absolutely nothing to do with ordinary citizens. Both the African civilian and the Western soldier are victims of a cold, calculating machine that views their lives as expendable variables in a shifting strategic equation. Let us take a moment here, not to rush forward, but to give thanks. Write a comment with a simple thank you to Traore, to Burkina Faso, or to the spirit of sovereignty itself. Gratitude is not a formality. It is recognition. It is dignity expressed in words. When you add your voice of thanks, you are not just engaging with a video, you are standing in solidarity with a story of freedom and pride. So, before we continue, take this pause to comment your thank you. Together, those words become a beacon that shines far beyond the screen. Here is where this unfolding story takes a sharp, undeniable turn that mainstream international coverage desperately does not want to examine too closely. They actively avoid it because it completely contradicts the underlying narrative that Western analysts have been aggressively pushing for decades about inherent African incapacity. The old empires have always operated on the deeply patronizing assumption that external intervention is an absolute, non-negotiable necessity for the survival of the global south. While the empire was hurriedly pulling out of the Sahel and loudly claiming they simply could not sustain those security partnerships anymore, they fully expected the region to collapse into chaos. Every prominent Western expert confidently predicted that any alternative security arrangements built by local leaders would disintegrate catastrophically within a matter of months. They truly believed that without their guiding hand, without their surveillance drones shadowing the sky, the fragile seeds of stability in the Sahel would wither and die in the harsh geopolitical climate. They assumed that the people of the soil were fundamentally incapable of governing their own harvest or defending their own deeply held sovereignty. The strategic architects in distant capitals essentially wrote off an entire region, calculating that the resulting chaos would eventually force the African nations to beg on their knees for a return of foreign troops. They thought the story of the Sahel was finished, merely a closed chapter in the grand, sweeping book of their global dominance. But they severely misjudged the fierce, unyielding spirit of a people who have finally decided to reclaim their own destiny. They completely underestimated what happens when a nation stops waiting for a reluctant, conditional savior and starts building its own formidable, independent fortress. When the supposedly helpless region was left entirely alone in the dark, they did not surrender to the shadows. Instead, they lit a brilliant fire that is currently shaking the very foundations of the continent. While the United States was rapidly pulling its forces out of the region and loudly claiming they simply could not sustain those critical security partnerships anymore, the people left behind did not surrender to despair. Instead, leaders in countries like Burkina Faso were brilliantly adapting to that sudden, callous abandonment. They began building profound, deeply rooted self-reliance models, boldly planting new seeds of sovereignty in their own ancestral soil. They forged alternative security arrangements that every single Western expert sitting comfortably in air-conditioned offices across Washington and Paris had arrogantly predicted would collapse catastrophically within a matter of mere months. But then, something truly remarkable happened just last month that you probably did not hear about on the evening news, simply because it completely contradicts the rigid, patronizing story that major international outlets desperately want to tell. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member, not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for Sankara's Echoes mission. Every member becomes a co-creator of the revolution we are documenting. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. Throughout the pivotal month of February in the year 2026, military forces under the steadfast leadership of Ibrahim Traore conducted sweeping, historic operations that triumphantly recaptured multiple localities. These were not just empty stretches of sand. These were vital, breathing communities that had been completely abandoned by the state and violently controlled by armed groups since way back in 2019. We are talking about critical, historically significant towns with names like Tongomayel, Pomangao, and Konchari. These were places that had been cynically and prematurely written off by highly paid foreign analysts as permanently lost territory. The global establishment had confidently declared that these lands would absolutely never return to sovereign government control. However, according to detailed, verifiable reporting from African sources documenting these military operations on the ground, these were not small, superficial, or merely symbolic victories engineered for cheap political propaganda. They were major, undeniable restoration campaigns. They involved highly coordinated, significant troop movements and brilliant indigenous strategic planning that fundamentally and irreversibly shifted the complex security dynamics across the entire region. The calloused hands of the local volunteer defense forces, ordinary men and women who intimately know the deep red soil of their homeland, took up the monumental, dangerous task of securing their own harvest. They did not wait helplessly for a foreign savior to grant them permission to defend their families. They understood that genuine freedom is not a gift bestowed by a departing empire. It is a profound responsibility claimed by the people themselves. And here is the absolute most crucial detail that matters immensely when deeply evaluating what this monumental shift actually means for the future of the global order. All of this incredible historic success happened entirely without American logistical support, completely without the intervention of French military forces, and without any Western military presence or assistance whatsoever. Burkina Faso had already confidently and decisively terminated those uneven, historically exploitative partnerships. They chose the difficult but honorable road of building alternative structures using different international partners and robust local volunteer forces that everyone in the Western intelligence community swore would never be effective. Yet, while the United States military apparatus was frantically preparing to launch this devastating billion-dollar-a-day Iran war, systematically and ruthlessly pulling every available military resource away from the African continent entirely, the resilient people of the Sahel were actively winning back the very ground that supposed experts had declared permanently unrecoverable without Western intervention. They proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that a nation's dignity cannot be outsourced to a foreign contractor. They proved that a true, lasting partnership must be firmly based on mutual respect, not perpetual engineered dependency. The old narrative of African incapacity was completely shattered by the undeniable reality of African strength. Let us critically examine the geopolitical timing here, because in the ruthless world of international relations, the precise sequence of events and the deliberate clustering of major military decisions often reveal a deep, unspoken coordination, or at minimum, shared strategic calculations that official government statements will absolutely never publicly acknowledge. The tragic deaths of United States soldiers start rapidly accumulating from the very first day of the Middle East conflict, which aggressively launched on the 28th of February this year. Simultaneously, according to multiple thoroughly verified sources, Burkina Faso spent that entire month of February successfully and methodically conducting those massive territorial recapture operations. The simultaneous occurrence of Western military hyper-focus on the Middle East and African self-liberation in the Sahel is not merely a passing historical coincidence, it is a profound, earth-shattering revelation. It completely dismantles the arrogant illusion that the global South requires the constant, paternalistic supervision of the old empires just to survive. It proves that when the suffocating heavy shadow of foreign interference is finally lifted, the powerful seeds of genuine sovereignty can rapidly break through the hard earth and reach gloriously for the light. It demonstrates what is truly possible when you stop waiting for help that never arrives, or help that only arrives with heavy invisible chains attached. But as these two completely parallel events violently unfold across the globe, billions of dollars burning senselessly in the desert sands of the Middle East, while a supposedly forgotten African nation quietly, efficiently secures its own borders, a much darker, more cynical reality about global power comes sharply into focus. These triumphant, undeniable victories in the Sahel do not just humiliate the highly paid Western military analysts, they completely and utterly expose a brutal, unforgiving test about how the world truly operates behind heavily guarded, closed doors. By early March, when that seventh soldier tragically dies and global oil prices spike dramatically to $119 per barrel on the 9th of March, the entire strategic landscape violently shifts. The world watches helplessly as the severe pain of this distant war trickles down to the calloused hands of working families everywhere. That sudden, devastating spike translates directly into crushing inflation at petrol pumps, soaring transport costs, and exorbitant food prices across the globe. Populations worldwide are silently funding this massive, sprawling conflict through their own daily economic pain, even when their respective governments are not officially sending troops to the front lines. Meanwhile, the Sahel, previously declared an absolute necessity for homeland security, has been completely memory holed. It is exactly as if those passionate, historic testimonies about vital interests were nothing more than elaborate bureaucratic theatre engineered to justify massive military budgets. To truly understand the profound depth of this geopolitical betrayal, we must apply a simple, unforgiving, analytical framework to decode these official narratives. Let us call it the priority reveal test. It is a tool that cuts violently through the polished diplomatic rhetoric to expose what actually matters through three simple, unyielding questions. First question: how much money flows to the claimed priority when budgets suddenly get extremely tight? Because money reveals the raw, unvarnished truth far better than any impassioned speech ever will. In this specific case, we vividly see nearly $1 billion burning every single day for the Iran conflict, but absolutely zero for the Sahel. This stark financial reality answers that first question with devastating, undeniable clarity. Second question: how quickly does the claimed priority get callously abandoned the exact moment something else demands the empire's attention? Because genuine, vital strategic interests do not simply evaporate overnight, but convenient political talking points absolutely do. Here we witnessed a complete, unceremonious military withdrawal within a matter of mere months, despite those dire homeland defense warnings. This rapid exodus tells you unequivocally that the region was never truly vital in the minds of the ultimate decision makers. Third question: does anyone in power show any genuine concern about the severe consequences of abandoning the claimed priority? If you genuinely believed a region mattered deeply for your own security, you would worry intensely about what happens when you abruptly leave. Yet, there has been absolute deafening silence and zero public concern about the Sahel security vacuum from the exact same officials who recently called it essential. Now, let us turn this story into a shared moment. Write in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country, your corner of the world. Sankara's echo will read them with gratitude, and we send to each of you a heartfelt wish. May your journey be filled with dignity, hope, and light. This is more than a video. It is a gathering of voices across the globe. When you diligently apply these three critical tests, You can effortlessly decode any official statement about global priorities. You can accurately determine whether they are genuine strategic assessments or just hollow bureaucratic justifications for massive budget requests that will inevitably get dropped the moment something else needs funding. The historical evidence strongly suggests a much darker, more cynical view that the African continent never actually mattered for American or European security in the minds of the elite, regardless of what was passionately sworn under oath. The massive military footprint in the Sahel was always primarily about justifying lucrative African budgets and maintaining a strategic presence for great power competition rather than addressing any genuine underlying security concerns. The homeland defense rhetoric was simply a convenient, highly effective framing designed to sell the funding to the political establishment. This horrific realization proves exactly what fierce advocates for true sovereignty have argued for decades: that external partnerships are fundamentally unreliable by their very design. The grand illusion of the rules-based global order has been thoroughly shattered by the deafening silence of the departing generals. The brutal reality is that partnerships built on manufactured dependency will inevitably betray you the exact instant the patron's attention naturally shifts elsewhere. This profound awakening means the only reliable road forward involves building sovereign capacity that absolutely does not require permission, validation, or presence from external powers who see you as a mere afterthought at best and a disposable geopolitical pawn at worst. The people of the Sahel, working the deep red soil of their proud nations, have finally realized that they can never outsource the protection of their own hard-earned harvest. As the heavy smoke clears from the abandoned, silent airstrips in West Africa and billows darkly over the burning oil fields of the Middle East, a stark, undeniable line has been drawn in the geopolitical sand. The old empires have definitively shown their true face, exposing a decaying system where official words carry zero weight, where sworn testimony means absolutely nothing, and where accountability is merely a cruel joke that everyone in power understands but nobody admits out loud. But the people of Burkina Faso and the broader Sahel have also shown theirs, a face of unyielding dignity, resilience, and fierce independence. As this monumental collision of global priorities reaches its climax, we are left staring at the ultimate consequence of this historic betrayal. What happens when the nations that were casually discarded and written off as helpless suddenly hold the very keys to the future that the old empires will desperately need to survive? As we stand back and observe the complete, devastating picture that has violently emerged over these past weeks, the undeniable facts are laid bare for the entire world to judge. Here is what absolutely nobody can dispute, regardless of their political allegiances or geopolitical spin. 7 American soldiers tragically died in a mere 10 days of fighting. $900 million burns away every single day in the distant, unforgiving sands of the Middle East. The Sahel, a region previously sworn under oath to be absolutely essential for homeland defense, got completely and callously abandoned. Yet against all Western predictions and arrogant expectations, the supposedly helpless African nations succeeded independently. Meanwhile, global oil prices violently spiked, deeply hurting working-class families and draining the savings of ordinary citizens worldwide. And through all of this unprecedented chaos, exactly 0 officials have stepped forward to explain the glaring, horrific contradiction between their sworn congressional testimony and their rapid, heartless actions. The deafening silence from the corridors of power screams far louder than any official explanation possibly could. It reveals a broken, decaying system where solemn words carry 0 weight, where sworn testimony means absolutely nothing, and where genuine accountability is treated as a foolish joke that everyone in power understands, but nobody dares to admit out loud. The sprawling spending patterns clearly reveal the unvarnished truth that carefully polished speeches deliberately attempt to hide. The horrific sequence of events strongly suggests that the African continent never actually topped the priority list for the global elite, despite all the grand, theatrical claims otherwise. The soil of the Sahel was merely a convenient stage for bureaucratic theatre, a temporary outpost to be instantly discarded the moment a more lucrative or historically entrenched conflict demanded the empire's full attention and endless resources. However, intellectual honesty absolutely demands that we acknowledge a profound uncertainty in this grand strategic equation. Perhaps there are highly classified intelligence assessments safely locked away in the vaults of Washington that supposedly justify these erratic, contradictory choices. Perhaps the supreme decision makers are secretly working with sensitive information we cannot access, data that would somehow make their catastrophic decisions appear rational if we only knew what they know. But even if we extend that generous benefit of the doubt, the fundamental democratic basics still intimately matter. Whether these leaders are making brilliant, multi-dimensional chess moves with hidden intelligence or making catastrophic, short-sighted choices serving narrow elite interests over public security, the people have an absolute right to demand basic transparency and unwavering consistency. Populations across the globe, from the quiet, struggling suburbs of the American Midwest to the vibrant, resilient communities of West Africa, deserve something fundamentally different from what they are currently getting. They deserve leaders who maintain a strict, unbreakable alignment between what they promise and what they actually do. They deserve honest, painful conversations about whether their brave young soldiers are dying to protect actual, tangible security interests, or whether they are tragically paying the ultimate price for elite calculations that serve objectives having absolutely nothing to do with ordinary people's safety or well-being. From the ashes of these broken promises and abandoned partnerships, a remarkably hopeful, undeniable truth has brilliantly emerged for the global South. The casual, ruthless abandonment by the West definitively proves what fierce sovereignty advocates have passionately argued for decades, that external partnerships built on engineered dependency will always betray you the exact instant the patron's attention shifts elsewhere. The profound military and social successes achieved independently in the Sahel are not just isolated tactical victories. They are a glorious validation of self-reliance as a permanent, unbreakable strategy rather than a mere political ideology. It is the ultimate realization that true enduring power does not reside in the hollow promises of distant wealthy capitals. It resides firmly in the calloused hands of the people who bravely till their own soil, plant their own seeds, and fiercely guard their own harvest. We become completely ungovernable by cynical manipulation the very moment we finally understand the actual brutal rules of the geopolitical game being played. As we prepare to end, remember, this is not the end of the road, but a seed planted in the soil of your heart. Every story of dignity, every voice of sovereignty is part of a harvest that lies ahead. If you want to see that harvest grow, subscribe. Let this channel be the road we walk together, the light we carry forward. Your subscription is not for us alone, it is for the promise of what is still to come. Join us and be ready for the next chapter that is already waiting to be written. The era of empty promises has definitively ended, exposing a harsh but liberating world where nations must forge their own independent destinies. The historic, unprecedented awakening currently unfolding in Burkina Faso stands as a shining, undeniable beacon of this new global reality. It vividly proves that when the people take absolute control of their own ancestral soil, no foreign empire can ever dictate their future. This monumental shift is largely guided by the unyielding vision of Ibrahim Traore, whose leadership has comprehensively shattered the old, suffocating illusions of manufactured dependency. Ultimately, the lasting legacy of Ibrahim Traore will not be defined by the distant, tragic wars the West chose to fight, but by the dignity, the magnificent harvest, and the absolute sovereignty that Africa courageously chose to reclaim.